Discover how to build a scalable business in today's episode with Penman. He's the CEO and founder of Jim's Group. And he's the CEO and founder of Australia's largest franchise called the Jim's Group, with more than 5,000 franchisees with 50 different franchise brands. So, how can entrepreneurs build a scalable business? Welcome to Awakened Titans podcast with Lily Patrascu. Mind-blowing conversations with influential business titans sharing how you can manifest abundance, love, joy, success through quantum awakening, quantum manifestation, quantum healing, quantum miracles, exponential business growth, and innovative products and services.
What's the secret? You've got to have a business that works well in the first place. It's astonishing how many people come to me about wanting to launch a new division, but they don't actually have a business that can act as a model. So the first thing I did was I was a lawn mowing contractor, and I learned how to mow lawns very, very well. And I run an efficient business and make a very good hourly rate, look after my customers very well. And when I had that in place, I could start teaching other people.
Okay. So I noticed on your website, you had one of the options was become a gym, which I thought was quite awesome. And I think it would be quite interesting to teach people how to become a Lily. And so far, I haven't actually got I haven't downloaded, you could say, my systems and operational things that I do into a system that other people can replicate. So I wonder, what do you suggest entrepreneurs do to start creating those systems?
Well, franchising is it's a particular way of doing things. We have a whole series of systems that teach people how to run a business successfully in a certain way. The first thing we do is we screen people fairly carefully in the beginning. We look at people who are interested in going into business, and we try and assess their suitability by interviews and by going out on the road. So we're selective in the beginning. Not everybody can adopt a successful business model if they don't have what's to take. And that's an imperfect thing. We make mistakes. We probably knock back some people we shouldn't, and sometimes we take people in who we shouldn't accept. So we try to find good people. We then do a training course where we teach people how to run a business. Now, it's a 3-day course, our basic, what we call generic training. I run 2 sessions. The first sessions, which is talking about customer service and service provided by franchisors to franchisees, and the one at the end about money. And then we go through a whole lot of things like bookkeeping, computer software, and so forth. But there's a very heavy emphasis in our system on the culture. It's not just going through using how to use the computer, but it's the actual ideas about the way you should treat customers. Like, for example, we have a very strong thing about returning a call within 2 hours. So when a customer rings or books online, we've got to get back to them within 2 hours. That's fairly strictly enforced. Franchisees who don't do that can be warned and reached and even terminated eventually. So it's really, really strict. They're supposed to phone. If they can't get through, they send a text to the client. Don't just leave a message. So there's all kinds of things like that. If you're going to be delayed, you set a 2-hour time slot. If they're going to be delayed, you must let the client know in plenty of time. If you send an email quote, you should back it with a text. There's a whole stack of different things that we find. So we train and we train. Now, once a person's started, we have an ongoing coaching service, which is that at least ideally once a week, but certainly once a month, the franchisor will ring the franchisee and they will check on how they're going and see if they've got problems and talk about any issues. If there's a complaint, they will also contact them. And they also run meetings. We require 8 meetings a year. That's the time to discuss. So you can help people with problems, you can run talks, you can encourage networking amongst franchisees. So there's a whole stack of, we teach people systems of operation, but we also have an ongoing coaching service. Because what we found is that the best time is spent is not a huge chunk of time, but lots of small time, this ongoing help. So if you're going to help a person, if you're going to scale your business, you've got to have frequent contact. That's the biggest thing. People will forget. We used to do things like we used to have like a once a year, franchisors would do an audit of the business like for half a day, but it wasn't effective. It's the frequent ongoing contact that matters.
Thank you.
So I don't know if that answers your. I can only answer specifically from my point of view. That's how we do it. But the difficulty with gyms actually is not so much we can teach people the software and so forth. It's trying to get the ideas across. The idea, for example, that we as franchisors, we call it servant leadership. You're basically in business to support your franchisees. That's a very strong cultural thing with us and very unusual. And it's very hard to get that going overseas when we have less contact with franchisees directly.
Thank you. So I noticed that your franchises are within so many different potential markets, like insurance and cleaning and so many different things. So I wonder, did that work? Because there are perhaps 80% of every business that you have set up as a franchise that are kind of duplicatable. Is kind of the same thing, like how you do your bookkeeping, how you answer the phone calls, how you kind of follow up, that kind of thing. Is it because that part is pretty much duplicatable across the board, and it's only the 20% that varies according to that specific business? Is that why it worked so well?
Yes, yeah, we stick to things we understand. Like you notice, we don't do any site-based franchises. We don't get involved in food, for example, though we probably would if it was something like catering or something of that nature. So they're actually extraordinarily similar. See, whether you're booking a job, if you're going to, client books a job, a lead, and you call them back, it doesn't matter whether it's bookkeeping or cleaning or gardening or dog wash. It's all the same kind of process. They all use the same kind of software systems. And what we've found too is that the reason that people succeed or fail has very little to do with technical expertise. It's not a case of, whether you know how to do an antennas job. It's a case of your attitude towards the job and your communication with the customer. So they actually are very, very similar. One thing I've learned from hard experience is not to go into businesses that I don't understand. We've tried different things over the years. Tried to set up a psychology institute, which is still going actually. A factory to make fiberglass trailers for our dog wash division. We've had trade exchanges. We've done all kinds of different things. And yeah, one thing in common is they all cost money. They all lost money. So we stick to what we know and then move out from there. And things that are similar. I had an email this morning from one of our current franchisees who wants to set up a tiling division. So I've been discussing that back and forth, and that's a real possibility. It's a successful franchisee, got a background in the industry, so we may have Jim's tiling on the track. We don't know.
Thank you. Tell us 10 different things that entrepreneurs should use in order to have a really good sales process. For example, what you mentioned already a little bit about, giving the email quote within 2 hours, that kind of little things that actually move the needle the most towards actually closing the sale and giving your clients a great experience.
I don't know about 10 different things, but there's one overwhelming principle behind what we would try and do. You have to look at the interests of the person that you're dealing with. So, for example, when we're selling a franchise to somebody, which is our most important sales, we actually have plenty of clients. We've knocked back like 280,000 leads in the last year. There's so much work. What we severely lack is franchisees. That's the hardest thing, to find good people and get them into the system and get them going. That's by far the toughest part of what we do. The secret we found is that you've really got to be focused 100% on the interests of the person that you're dealing with. So, which is why we actually knock people back. Partly, it's not just for the client's sake, because a poor operator will give bad service and undermine the brand, but it's even more for the franchisee's sake. If you put somebody on who's got no real chance to succeed, then it's a terribly bad thing to them. So we talk about, you've got to grant a franchise rather than sell it. And the same thing with customers. You've got to get to a customer and you've got to think, what's in the interest of this customer? Now, obviously, we've got financial interest in doing well, and we do tend to charge fairly high prices. We teach our franchises to do that. Great service, great prices, or good prices. But you've also got to consider whether you can really help that customer. So sometimes the customer wants something done, for example, that you can't do successfully. I'll give you an example where you've got really bad staining in a carpet. Carpet cleaning just won't get it out, and our guys know this. So they have to be very careful about taking on a job, and they'll quite frequently reject a job where they don't think they can do it well. It's not right, and it causes problems because the customer expects something that you can't provide. So be very focused on the customer. When it comes to the sales process itself, okay, now there's an important principle. A lot of people pick up from retail the idea price, price, price. Make it cheap, make it cheap. One thing you will not see is in virtually any gym's advertising, it's any talking about price, especially not cheap price. Okay, so our model for service franchises, I don't know how it applies to other products, but I think it's a big one for us. When it comes to services, give the best possible service that you can, but be prepared to charge more. In fact, we spend a lot more time telling our franchisees. I would have probably 20 conversations with the franchisees, encouraging them to raise their prices for one, but I might suggest they lower them. So bowl the customer over with great service, but be prepared to charge a good price for your level. Now, in different industries and stuff, but we would recommend that we would not even look at a division where we can't see an average operator making at least $70 per hour. That's our base hourly rate. If you can't come with an idea for a franchise and you can't show that sort of hourly rate, then we're not interested. And I'm not talking about the best people, I'm talking about the average person should be able to make. So for example, if I was to mow a lawn, it would take me, say, 35 minutes. Now that's a job where we want to charging something like $60-$70 to do that job so you can get your hourly rate. So the same thing. Success, we find, has a lot more to do with service than just giving the cheapest price. So let me give you an example, and we've done studies on this. We look at customers we ask customers whether, in one particular survey, we asked customers when the franchisee got back to them after the initial lead. And the options were within the first 10 minutes, after the first 10 minutes, within the first 2 hours, and after 2 hours. And then we asked the customer whether they actually got the job done. And there was a very striking difference. When franchisee rang back after 2 hours, less than half of them got the job. When they rang after the first 10 minutes, within the first 2 hours, 78% actually confirmed the job. And when they rang within the first 10 minutes and got through to the client, 85%. Now, that's a particular sample, and that particularly applies to phone leads, which are a better quality from our point of view. But in a sense, you virtually double the conversion rate from lead to job simply by when you call the client. And there's things like that too. And again, I'm talking specifically for industry. You can generalize this to retail or whatever if you like. But it's often the peripheral things that matter. For example, when you turn up to a client's place, you've got a uniform. You're properly signed and you're reasonably neat and respectable. Now, sometimes we get a bit grubby with the jobs we do, but you have proper signage. You have signage on your vehicle. That's impressive to a client. One of the questions I ask people at training sometimes, and particularly women, because most clients are women, we say to them, if you've got a choice between two operators, very similar in terms of overall, looks and presentation, one's wearing uniform, one isn't. But the person wearing the uniform is 10% more expensive. Who do you pick? Overwhelmingly, they'll go for the 10% more for the person in the uniform. So I often see this in tradies. They don't sign themselves. The little thing about a shirt with the right logo on it. Also things like having a proper quoting pad. You like an A4 sheet. They're very simple. It's all very cheap to do. Proper business cards, these kinds of things. So you can impress clients. People are very concerned about security. We have a big advantage with the brand because it's so well known, but it applies to anybody. So you've got to be properly branded. When you talk to a client, you've got to create value. Now, that means to say that you've got to show that you're interested in the client's welfare. Find out what they want. Give them advice. Sometimes the advice might not always be to their interest, to our interest. But if the client's interested, then you can show them things. You can explain them. You might even tell a client something that is in their interest but against yours. There's a book. I can't remember the name of the company. It's one of these big hardware chains in America. And there was this case where one of the partners in the business was in one of the local stores, and somebody came up to him and said, "Listen, one of your workers there is a real bad egg. He's done something really stupid." He said, "What did he do?" Well, he said that he came in with a problem, something that he wanted, and which would have cost like $200 to buy a new one. But the worker actually advised the guy how they could fix what they had. So he gave him like a $2 part. So he said, this guy, this really bad worker, has cost your company $200. And he said, who he is? I want to speak to him. He said, no, I don't want to get into trouble. He said, no, I don't want to get into trouble. I want to thank him and congratulate him. Because by looking to the interest, this worker was doing exactly what he should have done by looking to the interest of the customer, even over the interest. So we do the same thing too. If you can help a customer in a way that's actually good for them, then you'll do good for yourself. An example of that is my dentist, for example. Now, my dentist is a lovely lady called Sarah. I've been going to for years. And one of the things Sarah does enormously well is she helps me not to spend so much money with her, because she gives me advice on how to floss my teeth and the kind of things to use and stuff. Now, as a result of listening to Sarah, I had some very deep dental work done. I haven't had anything done the last 2 years because by following Sarah's advice, I've actually avoided the need to pay her a whole lot of money. So in an immediate business sense, that's probably not a good idea. But at the same time, of course, I always go back to Sarah, plus everybody I know. I say, go and get Sarah if you can, because she gets pretty booked out because she's so popular. So it's the kind of attitude that you have. But the same thing with lawyers, for example. Lawyers have a bad reputation, but I find there's two kinds of lawyers, and they're almost distinct species. You find that some lawyers who are the worst scumbags who will take you down dreadfully, and there are other people who are the most decent and honourable and ethical people in the world. And I want to give you an example of the first one for a case happened to us where one of my franchisees was basically sold a pup. There was something that went wrong, the franchisor, and they were claiming their money back, which was about $35,000. That was the claim. Now, they came to me and I said, look, you've got a good case. I'll support you with the franchisor and we'll get your money for you. And this person said, no, we'll go to a lawyer. So they went to a lawyer and took a case, and they took us on plus the franchisor. And the case was actually when letters back and forth, and there was mediation to be arranged, everything else. So there's a whole lot of things happening. And we went to mediation, and I gave the support as I said I would, to the case. They actually got their $35,000 back, plus $5,000 that I put in. But the lawyer's bill was $100,000. So you've got this lawyer who was a complete and utter scumbag, made a whole lot of money from this poor person. By the way, wasn't the wife who was doing it died. It was the husband who was trying to get the money, and they were completely ripped off blind by this guy. Now, whereas the good lawyer, and there are many of them around, will say to you, okay, and like my head lawyer, a guy called Andy, he's fantastic that way. He will always help a person to say, okay, what's the best outcome? And normally what they will do is try and get a mediated solution as quick as possible. Look at the situation, contact the other side, work something out. Try and work to get the best output for the minimum of costs. And so that kind of attitude. Now, in the short term, your scumbag lawyer will actually do quite well. And maybe in the long term they will, I don't know. But what I do know is that reputation matters a very great deal in which you do. And it's the same with us. When I started gyms back in 1989, I was up against a rival that had 250 franchisees. And I said, well, I tell you what, I'm not going to put growth above everything else. I'm going to have a policy where I'm going to be very selective, because I will not put on somebody I think is going to fail. But that's wrong. Now, I know that'll make me, I'm never going to really be successful. Somebody asked me at the beginning, and I said, well, if it really works well, maybe I'll have 100 franchisees one day. Somebody from the media asked me that. In fact, what I didn't realize is that it was actually a great business decision, because of the fact that I took people, only the ones that I'm pretty sure of, and looked after them very well. We were actually very, very successful, and we could use the list of our current franchisees. If somebody interested in the franchise, we give it to them and say, ring up our people. Now, often you do things that are against your interest. For example, if a franchisee wants to walk away and have their own business, we actually don't make it difficult for them. So we do a lot of things all the time that really are not financially sensible, but in the long run, and you lose money on all this, but in the long run, you tend to gain because of reputation. So it's that kind of business model where you try and do the right thing, the ethical thing, and that's not soppy impractical thinking. It's actually very good business practice because reputation matters so much. Not short term, not right now, but look at the months and years and even decades ahead, because we think very long term. Then that's what matters.
Thank you, and I'm glad you said that because I've had similar situations as well. When I was doing property management as my main thing, and I used to show the properties to prospective tenants, and sometimes they would come and they would say, I want to rent this property, and my workplace is like an hour away, and in London it's not so common that you rent something that's far away. I mean, yes, there are some people who do, but I always wanted to inform the people, I would check in advance how long it takes them. I would ask them, okay, where is your workplace? How, just to kind of figure out, is this a doable thing for them? And is it going to benefit them in the long term? Because of course, I also don't want to rent it to them and for them to feel maybe 2 months later that actually they're unhappy with the property and to not find a long-term tenant. So I would always make sure that even before they visit, I would tell them, by the way, this one is actually an hour away. Are you sure you're okay with that? Now, if it was like a very short commute in terms of not short, but necessarily an easy commute, for example, just like one train that you can sit on, I would say, okay, it will take you 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and then it's a very short, very easy commute, then I would tell them that. But I would mostly focus on finding people that lived anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes away from their workplace, because then I knew that they would be happy long term with that place. And it's also something that doesn't require like 2 changes, for example. And I know that's very specific. And I would tell them, for example, even things like, okay, how do you integrate in London? How do you, because we were renting to people actually that had never worked in London before and they didn't have references. And I know it's a strange way to rent to people, but it did work out for us. And I was helping them find a job too, which was not part of you can say what a property manager would do, but I was doing that for them. And sometimes they would end up staying there for 3 years because they were grateful. And I think the reputation is an important element, but I think for me, there's more than that. And it's knowing that I have truly helped and that I wasn't just there to kind of make a quick buck. That is more important. And yes, I understand people need to run a business and they have, more important elements to look at. But for me, it's the monetary aspect has never been like the primary thing, because it's so important to me that I'm actually truly helping people for their best interest. So I love that you said that as well. I love that. Tell me more about closing deals with clients. What would be a good process for entrepreneurs to follow in order to ensure that the closing of the deals happens faster, better with the right clients? You mentioned a little bit about being fast in terms of calling the customer. Was there anything else that you recommend in terms of closing deals and making sure that you're finding clients on a recurring basis in a very easy way, and you're closing those deals?
Well, it's a bit different in the service industry. We're talking about, getting somebody's lawns mowed. It's more a case of it just, or whatever it is, you're just impressing the client and coming across as professional. And I mean, you can always do things like the assumed close, for example. Look, you've come to a job and you can say something like, okay, well, look, when would you like me to start? Would you like it done tomorrow, or would you prefer next week? I mean, there's that sort of obvious kinds of things, but assuming that they're going to do it is probably a fairly good practice for pretty well anybody. You just, yes, it's like someone wants to buy a car and they say, well, can you do it in green as well as blue? You say, oh, would you like it in green? You sort of, it's assumed close. So there's those kinds of techniques. But we actually, in our crucial sale, which is selling franchises, we actually we tend not to use a hard sale. What we tend to say to them is not, sign, but look, what I want you to do is to do some research. I want you to go out there and I want you to find out whether, talk to some of the people here, bring up some of the list, have a chat to them, see if it's all right. You're going to need to spend a day out on the road at least with one of these guys. I'll show you who, and we're going to have a look at you, and we're going to see whether you're good enough to be in gyms. That kind of attitude. In a way, treating it, but then encourage them to be thinking: is this right for you? Which is what you were saying about your rental deal, the same thing. So it's the opposite to a hard close in a way. It's trying to say, well, look, we want to help you make the best decision. We want to make sure you're right for it. Now, of course, if you're actually granting a franchise, if you're saying to them, are you good enough to be a gym's franchisee, which is quite real, because if they don't show the right attitude, you won't accept them. In a sense, that the psychology is turned around. Instead of you trying to persuade them to buy, they're trying to persuade you they're good enough to be granted one, which in our case is quite real. So we call it selling by not selling in gyms. In fact, there was a title of one of my books. I periodically write books about the history of the business and then update them every now and then. And that was one of the titles, Selling by Not Selling. You don't actually push a person to sign. You actually help them to make the decision which is best for them, and give them the alternatives. Let me give you an example of how that worked. I had a lot of problems in the early days selling. Before I was a franchisor, I used to sell lawn mowing rounds, and I was really bad at selling lawn mowing rounds. And I was so unconfident in my ability to sell, because I'm a pretty nerdy sort of guy and not very socially skilled. I mean, anybody can tell you that. I'm hopeless that way. And I was so unconfident that I used to have at one stage, I even had a salesperson actually selling for me. And my office was a little shed in the backyard. It was tiny. And he'd be selling a business to somebody while I was in the same room doing something on the computer. So I was shocking at it. And I learned how to sell in one particular day from a guy I knew from my church. And I went to see him. He had an advertising agency. And I wanted to get advice on how to get more clients more effectively. So I went, and this is an impressive guy, millionaire, very good office and stuff, doing very well for himself. And I was a very basic contractor, nothing like successful. So he invited me into his office, and for half an hour, he just spent all this time telling me about advertising, how to advertise, where to advertise, and what kind of media and what kind of message and this kind of stuff. So he gave me some really good advice. Busy man, successful man. At the end of it, he said to me, Jim, you don't really need an advertising agency. You need to go and do this. So I walked out of the office and I thought about this, and I thought, well, if I ever do need an advertising agency, I am definitely going to use Peter. When I was walking back to the car, I was thinking about it. So I think, what on earth is my reasoning for this? Because this guy had not told me anything about his business. I didn't know about any of his clients. I didn't know what he'd done. I didn't know what he charged. I knew nothing. But I knew that I would use him. And in fact, years later, when I wanted to go on television, I did go straight back to him. This is after the franchise launched. And I thought about it while I was walking back to the car, just parked some streets away. And I thought, the only thing that he'd shown in that entire interview was my welfare and the welfare of my business. And by doing that, he'd sold me on his business. So I can just remember reaching out to my car, which in old days was a really battered old car, very backseat, ripped out, put rubbish in it, a really old car. It wasn't even locked. Nobody would steal it. I remember just reaching out, thinking, I wonder if this could work to sell lawn mowing rounds, which I'd been hopeless at. So the next time somebody called me and said, I'm interested in this lawn mowing round, which advertised in the paper, I started by asking him a question. I said to him, tell me, do you know what the cut of a lawn mowing round means? Now, in the parlance, cut is each lawn done once. So if you've got 60 cuts worth $60 each, that's a $3,600 cut. And if you're in the industry, you understand that, and then you can work out the income, job done every 2-3 weeks, whatever. So you can figure it out. That's standard. But I knew most people who were coming in didn't know what that meant. So what I was doing, I started to talk about the business and how it worked, and just giving him advice about the business. And then he came to see me in the office, and I did the same sort of thing. I just I just told him about the business and all about advertising and stuff like that. And then I gave him a sort of a summary of clients. I said, look, this is my round. Have a try that. Now, I had a real interesting test of this approach shortly afterwards. One of these people came back to me, rang me back, and he said, Jim, I want your advice. He hadn't bought a business from me. He said, I want my advice. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, well, I've been offered a business in my area, and I want to find out which is the most successful, which is best for me. That one or this one, which was quite interesting because he was asking me to give advice that could have been against my own self-interest. So I must have shown some genuine concern. So I asked him the questions. I said, okay, what's the cut? How many customers? How far apart are they? How long has he had it for? What's he leaving for? What's he going to do? Just obvious questions. You know, if you're in the industry, you understand. And then you can allow for things like the potential drop-off of clients and all these things, okay? So at the end of the conversation, I just said, look, that's a better business. Go and buy that one. Because that was real. Got asked the same question 3 times. 3 times people rang me up to ask me. Twice I said buy the other business. The third time I said it's a better business, it's local, but he's charging too much. Drop the price to that and offer him that one. So I gave away 3 sales. So I thought, okay, well, that's good. But they all came back and bought from me, every single one. They all bought from me. And from that time onwards, when I stopped worrying about what I was going to make and started concerned about the person I was dealing with, I never had any problems selling lawn mowing rounds ever again. And when I launched the franchisee, it was the same complaint, and I built eventually what's 5,500 franchisees by basically trying to use that same technique. And it'll be the same thing. I remember that guy was talking about with the tiling, okay? Now, I've done some questions. First of all, I've checked whether we can do tiling, whether it's a decent business. But secondly, I've discussed it with somebody else. I've talked about him. I've asked him looked at his customer service rating, which is very good. I've got asked about his turnover, his knowledge of the business. So before even taking it to the next stage, I've done a whole lot of things to try and assess whether this person's likely to succeed. And then to actually do it, he's going to have to do full training, which is franchisor training, which you'll pay for, but just to cover the costs. And we're going to get him to come to a conference, divisional conference, which run every 6 months, to where he can learn about what's going on. We'll actually invite him, encourage him to ring everybody in that list, as many other divisionals as possible. So we're going, in all this time, we're basically saying to him, we want to make sure as far as possible that you are going to succeed. And we do not push the envelope. We do not push it hard. We're actually almost pulling it back and saying, okay, come on, do your research, because we want you to succeed. Now, I could easily sell these things and I could get a lot of money from them. We don't even ask for money up front, actually. We actually have what's called a rental, where they pay only after it's kind of given to them, but they pay some ongoing fees, and then it's given to them if they reach a certain target in terms of franchisee numbers. So we don't even ask for money up front in particular. So the whole approach is it's a very long way. It's almost the opposite of closing a sale, isn't it? It's actually going and saying, what's in your interest? How can I help you? How can you make the best decision? And that's a matter of ethics, because having a person fail is the most horrifying thing. It's the thing that upsets me the most. But it's also, in the end, it's good business, because the fact that most people do succeed is enormously beneficial. So to give you a simple statistic, okay, if you go into business like lawn mowing or cleaning or those kind of things, if you look it up on the internet, you'll find that the failure rate in the first year is between 90 and 95%. So about 5 to 10% of people who start a business like that will be in business. And with our case, it's around about 12% will drop out in the first year. Okay, that's the difference. But the whole lot of things go into that, choosing the right person, training them well. We find putting a proper training course actually dropped our first-year nutrition course. We measured these things exactly, and then we see what kind of support, what kind of phone calls, what the meetings, what's the best way we can help somebody to succeed. So you're always looking to the interests of your person you're dealing with. So I don't know if that's really against what you're saying, but in a sense, we almost don't close at all. We almost try and discourage a person from But when you're doing that, what you're actually showing them is that you're genuinely concerned about them being successful. And that is actually a very powerful sales tool. And in the end, you know, we're bigger than our nearest 20 competitors combined. We've completely dwarfed the market. And our competitors never did this. You know, I spoke to I had a guy who was selling for one of our rivals at one time, and he came to work for me very briefly. And I said, how do you decide what criteria do you use for selecting a franchisee? And he said, what we're told is this: your requirements are $50,000 and a pulse. And I'm not exaggerating. That is really normal in the way they look at these things. And we just don't do that. So I don't know whether you call that closing or what you call it, but that's how we think about things.
I would call it take the sale away.
Well, yeah, but what's best for you? It's like you've got to think of the person you're dealing with. You've got to have a sense of economy. If you don't make money, you go backwards. But it should never be, and I think what you were saying before, it should never be the thing in the forefront of your mind, how much money can get for this person. Whoever it is, your foremost point should be what is in the best interest of this person. And if that means sending them somewhere else, you should have the decency and the ethics to do it. And you never want to be in a situation so desperate you have to take somebody. We had a case where a lady rang me about some problems with the contract. I give my personal direct phone number and email address to every new prospective franchisee, everybody. And I say, you contact me anytime, daytime, evenings, weekends. They won't go ring me Christmas Day. So I do that. This lady rang me about problems with a contract that she was setting up. And I discovered that after a bit of questioning, that she was buying it on behalf of her son, who was in his early 20s. And he hadn't, and I said, why are you doing this? She said, because he can't find a job. And I said, there is no possible way that we're going to sell you a franchise, because that is guaranteed failure. And she said, I wish I'd never rung you. I said, no, it's a great thing that you did, because you would have made a very serious mistake if you'd done that. She said, what do I do? This son hasn't got a job. And I said, okay, I've got a couple of franchisees in the area who are very, very overloaded with work. What if I get them to go out on the road with them? Went out on the road with those two guys, absolutely hopeless, completely capable of doing the job. That we could have taken all that money. Well, actually, not me, the franchisor who was doing it, had a guy just completely fail. Now, I was absolutely furious when I discovered that. The outcome of that is that not only because it would have behind the brand, but it was the wrong thing to do, ethically speaking. When that regional franchise come up for renewal, I said to the guy concerned, I said, you are not renewing. I want you to sell your business. And he found a buyer, and he actually did quite well financially. But I was so angry that he would put somebody through who was so clearly in all of our guidelines not going to be successful. Now, you've got to make that kind of decision all the time, and that is just good business. You've got to stop thinking about money first. And too many entrepreneurs are too focused on money. I would never be in a business that I couldn't see value. For example, I would never, ever, ever, ever invest in Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. Why? Because it's all based on speculation. It's based on somebody paying more. If I can't see a value to it, I'm never going to spend a cent on it. That's the fundamental point of ethics. Now, I think it's actually pretty good business too, because most people who go in for these kind of things lose money. I know some make money, but lose money. But it's not a good business. Go into something where you can genuinely help people. And in the end, it's ethically right, but it's also right from a business point of view.
Thank you. Tell us where entrepreneurs can go to find you and your franchise options.
www.gyms.net. It's very simple, work anywhere in the world. And you go in there. There's actually a section called Meet Jim or something like that. And you can go in there and you can there's masses and masses of videos. We've done thousands of videos in interviewing successful franchisees, and they're good for any kind of business. What I've given you is a tiny fraction. There's massive. They're all over YouTube. There's channels you can read them, and people who've talking about lawn mowing contractors who are making millions of dollars a year. We've probably created more millionaires in Australia than any other company in the country. I believe we have, actually. We show people how to do that. That doesn't mean most of them do. Most of them just happy to have a 1 or 2 man business. But you can learn all about it from us. We give it away. We even invite people to come to our training courses. You just say, pay the you don't have to be you don't have to buy a franchise to come to our training course. You just come and pay the same price as anybody else, which is very modest. I've actually had 2 people come and do our training courses who went off and started rival franchises. Neither of them went anywhere, but we don't mind. We had a guy from the States actually come over and he did our course. He's a franchisor, and he did our full course. But it was great, actually. He helped us run a seminar and he showed us about some of his secrets too. So we just share things around. There's no secrets in gyms. We tell you everything.
Follow us for more interviews with world's most influential business titans, providing you with the insights to awaken to your full potential so you can get paid to be yourself, find true happiness, and manifest anything you desire.